One of the most common areas to backlog in anybody's system is all the stuff that we feel we have to read. Now, these could be newsletters that related to our professional lives. They could be articles that get sent to us from our boss or colleagues or customers, and they just build up. And quite often, they build up in our email system or even indeed our messaging system like Slack or Teams. The problem is these things are generally low value, which means that there's no sense of urgency to actually sit down and read them. However, there are a few tools available to us that can help us, and just with a slight adjustment to our daily schedule, we can find sufficient time to keep on top of all these articles. Now let's start with the tools that you can use. Now there are two tools that I am familiar with, although I am sure there's probably others out there. Those two tools are Read by Readwise and Instapaper. Now there was a third called Pocket, but I've heard that Pocket is now being discontinued or is no longer supported. But the two that I am very familiar with are Read by Readwise and Instapaper. Now both of these tools are fantastic. You can store anything you want in text format. They remove all the advertising and all the digital distractions that come if you're trying to read the raw article itself. And it just gives you a text-based field in order to read whatever it is that you need to read. Now, of course, the links are still active and the images are usually kept. Now, I should point out that I used Instapaper for about 8 or 9 years, and then they doubled their prices. And I didn't feel that there was sufficient value for me to maintain my subscription with Instapaper, given that I was already using Readwise for all my book notes that I have in Kindle. And Read by Readwise, which is kind of like a sit-on product that they have to their system, enabled me to actually bring in all my articles like RSS feeds, and they also brought in this place where I can just keep all my to read later articles. But this isn't about whether Instapaper or Readwise is better. What it is just the service that it provides you. Now let's just look at what Readwise gives me, and I can share with you then how I use it in order to maintain my to read later lists. Now the big thing for me is that Instapaper and Readwise give you a unique email address that's dedicated to your account with them. What you can then do is use that email address to sign up to newsletters. That means that these newsletters are no longer coming into your email. They are going directly to Read or Instapaper, whichever read later service you're using. That means that everything is being collected for you in the background. It also means both of them also have what would be described as an extension or I can't remember what Safari called them. Anyway, essentially what you can do is put the little icon into your top line of your browser, whether you're using Chrome or Safari or Edge. And then all you need to do when you see an article that you want to read, or somebody sends you a link and says you should read this, all you'd need to do is open up the article, click the little button at the top in your menu bar, and it will automatically get saved to your read later service. So they make it incredibly easy to save articles into your whatever read later service you're using. Now that takes care of the collecting. However, as with all things that we collect, we do need to do something with it. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of how we're going to organize this. You can create little folders in these places. You can create tags. You can do all sorts of things in the archive. That's entirely up to you how you want to organize that. However, one of the key parts to this is any service like this, a read later service, or whether you've got a to-do list or your notes app, is actually taking action on it. Now, in order to read later, you need time. You can't just think, oh, great, I've solved this problem now, everything's getting stored into whichever service you choose to use, and now I can sit back and relax. Well, no, not quite as simple as that. Once you've made the decision to get all these read later things out of your system and into a dedicated reading app, the next thing you have to decide is, well, when am I going to read all these articles? Now, I don't travel very much, but usually when I do travel, I will be traveling 15 hours in going west to Europe and then coming back going east. 15 hours on a plane for me is a great opportunity to catch up on my reading. Unfortunately, I do that only once a year, so these articles are just going to build up. I think when I recently went over to Europe, I had about 270 something articles to read. And it got me thinking that, okay, the problem here is that the services are great. They do reduce the clutter in my productivity daily system. Unfortunately, I'm not doing anything with them. So what can I do with it? When am I going to sit down and read? And then I found some inspiration. One of my interests is how people used to work before the digital explosion. Now, I realized watching and looking at some of the images from those days that the trend in the 2015 to pretty much to today in office or desk setups was pure minimalism. Strip out everything from your desk, just have a monitor, a keyboard, and perhaps your phone on your desk, but nothing else. Well, I always had a problem with that because it felt like I'd just stripped the soul out of my working environment, and it became so clinical that it was horrible. It just felt so inhumane to be sitting in such a clinical environment, trying to be creative, trying to come up with ideas and solutions to problems that I was working on. So I started bringing back some of my tools and gadgets, and not gadgets, but little toys and images and pictures, and now I have a working environment that feels me. It's human again. But another consequence of that is our whole work areas basically became so minimalist that there was the only place you could read these articles was continuing to sit or stand, because people started buying standing desks, at your desk, staring at the screen that you'd been staring at all week or all day. Well, no wonder nobody wants to read these articles, because the very thing that you want to do is get this work finished and I can run away from this horrible place that I'm working. But then I saw some images from the past, and I saw images like Margaret Thatcher going through her government boxes, sitting on or curled up on the sofa, going through the papers. I saw pictures of Prince Charles going through his documents, again, sitting in a comfortable chair. And then I also saw images of Charles Darwin's study, where he had this amazingly leather armchair where he would sit and read through papers and documents and so on and so forth. When he actually wanted to do some work like writing or doing some experimenting, he had a set area for doing that. But reading documents, reading papers, even reading books were done in their reading chair, this very comfortable chair. Now, one of the chairs that I've always had an eye on, but they are just ridiculously expensive, is one of the famous Eames chairs with the footstool. It just looks like the perfect reading environment. And that is when the penny dropped in my mind. Thought, no, this is why I'm not reading documents, because I don't want to stay at my desk that I've just spent the last 2 hours at writing a paper, writing an article, whatever. I just want to rest. And I thought, well, okay, I've got a sofa in the office. Why not just go and sit down there with my iPad and my Readwise app and read documents and papers and articles for the next 30 minutes. So I give myself a 30-minute break, and that's the way I see it, a 30-minute break in the day where I can sit down on the sofa and just go through these articles. Now, the thing I like about Readwise, of course, is because I can actually highlight these articles. These will then pop up in my daily email that I get from Readwise, which are just the highlights that I've highlighted. Now, I got back from my summer holiday about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and now I can say that I went from a 270 odd articles to read down to about 70 articles, and I have read the majority of them. And each time I've just stood up from my desk, gone and sat down on the sofa with my iPad and just given myself 30 minutes. So I've essentially gone through nearly 300 articles down to less than 100 just over a few weeks by reading for about 30 minutes a day, and I really enjoy it. Now, the thing is, I also go and make myself a cup of tea, I put some quiet music on in the background, I change the environment in which I'm working in order to make it a little bit more, shall we say, relaxing. And the lighting is generally much calmer as well. And although I would love, because I love my pen and paper, I would love to go back to the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s and read papers as a whole and use coloured pencils and so on. I am a realist as well, and actually the iPad is going to do this way better than having banks of piles of paper around me. It's also a much tidier way of doing it. The other thing is if I do see an article that I find, oh, this is going to be useful for this project, or this will be useful for that, I can then directly send the article to Evernote straight out of Readwise, and then I've got it saved and can be processed into my notes that way. And that's something else I should point out. I do use Readwise, and in the past I used Instapaper, as a kind of filter for my notes. I would read the article and then make a decision about whether this article is worth keeping or not. If it's not worth keeping, I would just delete it or archive it. If I do want to keep it because I think, oh, this will be helpful for a project I'm working on in the future, then it will get saved to Evernote. Directly from there, it's just one click of a button. And that's it. So this is something that if you're really struggling about what to do with your read later services, whether it's Instapaper or Readwise or something else, then first of all, you do need to try and reduce the amount of stuff coming into your email by getting hold of that unique email address that each service will give you, and then re-signing up for your newsletters using that address. The second thing I would do is you've got to be intentional about this. It's not about just getting another tool and moving stuff out. This means that you now have to take action on using that tool. As I say, for me, sometime mid-afternoon, I will sit down on the sofa and I will go through these articles. It is actually another one of those nice relaxing parts of the day where I know I'm doing work, I know I'm doing something important because these articles are giving me ideas that I can generate for content myself, but also I'm learning. So it's very, very useful time, but it's giving me that chance to stay on top of all these things that I should be reading, but in the past never had time. But you've got to be intentional about it. Now, I wouldn't say that you block time out for this on your calendar. I don't. It's just that, oh, I've finished this work. I've stared at this computer screen for so long. It's time to change the environment, go and sit on the sofa and do some reading where essentially I'm gaining knowledge instead of passing out knowledge. So I tend to think when I'm writing an article, I am putting out my knowledge into an article. When I sit down to read these articles, I am gaining knowledge because I'm learning new things. So it's a really good way of maintaining fresh ideas in my mind. So there you go. I wanted to share that with you. But the key thing here is find a service, a tool, Instapaper, Read by Readwise, whichever one you prefer, and set that up so that all your newsletters are going directly to that. Secondly, be intentional about reading these articles. It might be something you do after dinner. Go and sit down on the sofa for 30 minutes and just read these articles. You'll often find that you'll end up spending an hour reading if you have the time, because you get very much locked into that kind of relaxing feel where you don't have to type, you don't have to really think, you're just reading and gaining knowledge. And those really are the two factors. Be intentional about the reading time. As I say, you don't necessarily have to schedule this. You might need to do it initially in order to develop the habit. But once the habit's developed, forget putting it on your calendar. It wants to be flexible, and so you can do it at any time. So there you go. That's something I just wanted to share this week. I hope you found this useful. If you want to learn more about how I use these services, then this video up here is the one to watch next.